This is your host, Casey DeShock. Alaska Conversations is supported by a community of Alaskans dedicated to our state. If you'd like to view more information about the show, you can find us at alaskaconversations.com. There you'll be able to find this podcast as well as our show archive. The website is another place to find information and data concerning the topics we discuss, events, upcoming guests, and more about Alaska Conversations. If you have a question, comment, topic recommendation, or a suggested guest, you can email contact@alaskaconversations.com. This is episode 8. Welcome to Alaska Conversations. My guest today is Bryce Wrigley, and he is the owner and CEO of the Alaska Flower Company. Bryce has been involved in Alaska agriculture for about 40 years and has multiple generations operating the family farm near Delta Junction. Bryce, welcome to Alaska Conversations.
Thank you, Casey. My pleasure to be here.
The Alaska Flower Company operates the only commercial flour mill in the state, so you found a way to grow your business from a wholesale type of business to at least some of your product. You're doing value-added business or creating value with your product. What type of products does the Alaska Flower Company produce, and what percentages are value added?
Well, as far as Alaska Flower Company, we value add pretty much all of the products that we grow for the flour mill. We raise the products on our farm, family farm here in Delta. And in 2011, we started Alaska Flower Company. And our goal in doing that was to increase or enhance food security for Alaskans. And so we started milling the barley into flour products. So we don't have any wheat. All of our products are made 100% with barley, which is reflection of the fact that, in our location, wheat is not a reliable crop. So barley is a reliable crop. If you're going to do something for food security, then naturally you need to gear a flour mill something that you can grow, and that is barley. And so we make our barley that we grow on the farm. We make it into flour, which we sell flour, but we also make pancake mixes and brownie mixes and cookie mixes, and always looking for new mixes. And then we also make cream of barley cereal. We make couscous, and we started making some seasoned couscous mixes. So we use the couscous instead of rice. It's a whole grain, 100% whole grain. Barley is high in beta glucans. It's a low glycemic index food. Really, really ideal food for people with diabetes or prediabetes. And we didn't know any of this stuff when we first started, but talking with some of the doctors who have contacted us about sourcing it for their patients, we learned a lot and have become quite an advocate for using the barley in your diet in those situations particularly. So that's kind of where we started from as far as where we are right now in terms of our value added. Pretty much all of the stuff that goes through the mill is value added. We do raise other type of grain, other type of barley that is for animal feed. But the barley that we use for people food is actually hulled barley that was developed by the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
So it's its own special strain of barley designed for Alaska, or is it more widespread than that?
Yes, it was actually designed for Alaska. I'm not sure how long they worked on it, but there are 2 hulled barley varieties that were developed in Alaska, and Sunshine was the most recent. We like the Sunshine. The other one is Thule. We like the Sunshine because it's a little lighter kernel, and so the flour is not quite as dark. The thing about barley is it's high in fiber. It's got 2.5 times the fiber of wheat, and I already mentioned the beta glucans and the benefit that provides. But the high fiber it's a complex carbohydrate, and so it helps regulate how fast your body converts that starch to sugar. So, and that's the benefit that it is for people with diabetes is that it doesn't convert in a rush or in a big chunk that raises your blood sugar. So that's why the people like that.
And when you're looking at selling your barley, your human products for human consumption, are you primarily doing that person to person in a market, or do you see most of your sales at AlaskaFlourCompany.com or your website? One of those, or is it about 50-50?
Most of it now. We started out with pretty much direct sales, and most of it now is actually going to a wholesale market. So we sell to all of the Safeway stores, pretty much all the Safeway stores in Alaska. We sell to the Three Bears stores, and there are a number of other not chain stores, but health oriented stores in Juneau and Sitka, Anchorage. Natural Pantry is one popular one in Anchorage. Then on the Kenai Peninsula, Xavier Moore store there that is carrying our products. And we're always trying to grow. In fact, we're working right now with Costco to get into Fairbanks, and then we have been informed that should be expecting a call from Fred Meyer. So we're continually trying to grow that market.
So somebody can find you in local stores. Just make sure that you're looking in the right aisle. Look for Alaska Flour Company. You mentioned food security. It's something that you emphasize a lot on your website. You talk about it a lot in other media engagements that you had. What is food security to you, or when you're explaining it to somebody who's never heard the word food security, what does that mean to you?
Well, to us, it means increasing or enhancing our ability in Alaska to grow some of our own food. I realize we're not going to be growing grapes, oranges, and stuff from anytime soon, but I think it's important that Alaskans have a source of locally grown food that provides a balanced diet. And so when you look at that balanced diet, you got to include grains and meat and vegetables and fruits, and in order to get the right variety to keep your systems functioning right. And so we provide that grain, and that's one of the reasons we provide a bunch of value added products. For example, rather than just plain couscous, I mentioned that we also make seasoned couscous. So people, that's kind of the way a lot of people cook now. They don't really cook from scratch so much. Both parents are working usually, and so they come home. Everybody's tired. Everyone got homework and stuff like that. So you just want to put something in the pan and be able to cook it up and have dinner ready to go in 15 minutes. And so that's what we can do. The same with the pancakes. We made flour for several years, and people certainly could make pancakes with it. But we made pancake mixes, so that it would facilitate that. And in our developing these mixes and these recipes, we always try to be really conscious of how much sugar we put in, the recipes that we were putting in. So they're pretty good, healthy as well as good tasting. And that was the other thing. We wanted to make sure that our products didn't taste like they were really off a store shelf, but rather that they tasted like you made it from home. Brownie mix, for example, which I'll tell you right now is not a brownie mix that you would want to give somebody with diabetes. It's got sugar in it, but man, they're fantastic. But we worked for a long time on the brownie mix to make sure that it didn't taste like it was made out of a store mix. And so now when you cook it up, it tastes like you made it up from scratch, and it's really, really good.
Well,
so
that's got to be
that's always been part of our goal,
It's got to be some of the best working hours that you've ever put in, constantly bringing brownies out of the oven or whatever to make sure that the mix is just right. That I would be really interested in that time.
Yeah, there's never a shortage of taste testers.
Well, so let me look at the history of the Alaska Flour Company, because one of the things that's interesting is kind of how agriculture more broadly has how we look at it in Alaska, because we have a lot of raw resource, but it's hard to convert it. So I imagine when I look at the dates, when I see farm started 1983, I pretty much associate the beginnings of the Alaska Flour Company as being part of the Delta Barley Project. Is that correct? And if it was, what was it that made Delta an attractive investment for you in the beginning?
Yeah, so I was a third generation in my family coming into farming. I lived in southern Idaho, and my ancestors always farmed, probably since Adam was a baby. But but I was the third generation coming into our family corporation, and there just really wasn't any place around for us to expand, for my family to expand for that third generation. It was me, my cousins, and so we looked at increasing herds. We raised sheep in Idaho, among other things, and we bought some more sheep. But everybody else in the area had the same situation we did. Their kids and grandkids were they were coming home from school and getting into the family farm, and so everybody was looking for ground, and there just really wasn't any more ground that you could afford. And about that time, this was 1982, I read an article in Successful Farming about the Barley Project, and it's one of those things. Sometimes you read something or hear something, and it settles in your mind. You can't get it out, and that's exactly what happened to me. I thought about that all the rest of that harvest season in 1982. We started lambing in January of '83. I thought about it all during lambing season, and by May, the end of May, we had planted our crops. Everything was in the ground, ready to go, and I finally turned to my dad and I said, I'm going to have to go up to Alaska to see what this looks like. I can't get it out of my mind. And so I hopped in my little Toyota pickup, and me and my dad drove straight through. It took 60 hours to get up here from Idaho. We stayed a week looking around, talking to farmers, talked to some state seed people. And, the Barley Project had just been going. In fact, we pulled onto a farm that had just been planted with its first crop. And coincidentally, that wound up being the farm that we now own. It was owned by somebody else at that time, but so we were here fairly early in the Barley Project, but we didn't do any of the clearing. The clearing had already been done. And so anyway, we stayed for a week and talked about it and drove back home, back to Idaho. And of course, you're working on notes and talking and stuff like that, and finally decided we'd move up. So we stayed in Idaho and helped get the crop out. And then in November, actually late October, we'd finished digging sugar beets. So I pulled the beet puller up and I said, you guys are going to have to clean this up because I've got to get out of here. It's going to be winter in Alaska. And we came up, we got here November 11th.
Oh, yeah, you were right.
1983.
You were way in the winter already, I'm sure, 1983.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the reason, because the banks wouldn't loan money on agriculture. And so the only option we really knew about that we could get financing for putting in a crop was with the Agriculture Revolving Loan Fund with the state, which had to be a resident. And we didn't have jobs. So we got, we bought a couple of chainsaws, bought a trailer, brought it up behind my pickup. And I had a bigger pickup than the Toyota too. So we brought it up. And we cut firewood for the first winter, and that's why we came up in November, because we knew that we could cut firewood, and there would be a market for that. And so we cut firewood that first year, established residency, put in a loan, and then we made arrangements with a local farmer here to use some of his ground and some of his equipment in exchange for a share of the crop. And then he ultimately wound up buying pretty much most of the rest of our crop for his hay, or to raise hay for his cattle. And that was kind of what started us. We kicked around different things. We planted potatoes for a couple of years. We planted broccoli a year. We did a bunch of custom work, hay hauling and straw hauling. And finally we got an opportunity. And the reason we did that is because there was a lot of grain being grown, and not a lot of places for it to go. So we tried different things, and finally we settled on about 80 acres, rented some from somebody else, and put in 80 acres of barley, which is really what we came up here for, and couldn't sell it. This wasn't a market for it. And so we got into pigs. We bought some pigs and raised them up and bred them and started raising pigs. Raised pigs for about 10 years. And we would feed the barley to the pigs and then sell the pigs. That was how we supplemented our farming habit. And we were in the pig business until about 1999. And the price of pigs, I don't know if you recall, back then, you may be too young for that.
A little bit too young.
They went really, really bad. I mean, they were down in America. They were selling them for $6, or else they were knocking them in the head and burying them because they just weren't worth anything. It was cheaper to lose them than it was to feed them. And so we saw that starting to happen. We realized that that was going to impact our ability to stay in business too up here. And fortunately for us, by that time, a lot of people, by the late 90s, a lot of people had quit raising barley and put it into hay or something else. And so there was an opening market starting to grow there. And so as we transitioned out of pigs, stopped feeding pigs, then we started selling the barley. And so within 6 months, we had sold all of our pigs that we still had and started selling the barley. And that's what we were doing from 2000 on until 2011, when we started the flour mill. And what really started us on the flour mill was really a food security issue. I remember 2005 watching Hurricane Katrina on the news, and I was just something really impacted me there when the announcer said that a helicopter was flying around the roof, and there were some people on top of the roof of one of those buildings down in New Orleans. And the announcer said somebody had shot his neighbor for their food. And for some reason, that just really hit me hard. And I thought, man, what would happen if something like that happened up here? Another thing that amazed me was then in New Orleans, it was just kind of that crossroads of, you realize how much food goes out of America and through America, through New Orleans. And there's highways going right through there. That's kind of the heartland of America. And it took 2 weeks for the United States government to get food into those people. And I thought, wow, how long would it take for them to get food up here? So all of this kind of started rolling around in my mind. It kind of gelled into an idea that we were already raising grain. What if we raised a different type of grain for people food and started a flour mill? And so it took 6 years for us to kind of work through that plan, and I tried to get other people to do it, and they didn't want to. And so finally we decided in 2011 to do that. And so December of 2011, we started construction. December 2011, we started the mill up and milled our first flour.
Well, let me go back.
But that was the impetus of all of it, was do something about food security for Alaska.
So I'm going to touch on the food security here in a second again, but let me go back to you brought up the agricultural revolving loan fund, and let me just explain this one. You tell me where I'm wrong on this, but a lot of people don't understand the challenges that agriculture. It doesn't matter if you're in America or you're up here, or especially in Alaska, financial institutions aren't really set up. They understand when somebody's asking for money for capital improvements for a building or for equipment. That makes sense. But people don't understand the cost that is incurred by purchasing your seed or your fertilizer or whatever you're using in any given year. So many states, especially agriculture states, have loan programs, oftentimes supported by the state, that give basically sometimes it may be 2 year, but generally a 1 year loan, which allows a farmer to make an investment in some form of new crop or continued crop, and then that's paid off at the end of the year after the harvest, something like that.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's an operating loan. So yeah, you get a loan every year to buy your fertilizer and seed and pay your fuel and labor and whatever else you need to pay, or to supplement what income you do have from the farm to pay for those large ticket items that come along, occasionally during the year. And so that's an operating loan. One of the things that really surprised me is, coming from Idaho, an agriculture state, was that there was really not a problem finding money to buy land, for example, buy a farm. But Alaska just didn't have that. I mean, the banks would loan money on fishing boat, and I never could understand why they wouldn't loan money on a farm, because the fishing boat could go out and sink, but the farm was always going to be there. I never could figure that out. I still don't. After 40 years, I still haven't figured that out. But in any event, that was our dilemma. That was why we needed to establish residency, and why we borrowed with ARLF. There are a couple of other loaning programs that can be used for agriculture. At the time, we didn't know about them. One was FSA, which is a federal program. It's quite cumbersome to get into. The other is ARC, Alaska Rural Rehabilitation Corporation, which was actually organized to form back when the colonists came up to Palmer. So there was that was the loaning agency for those colonists, and it's been privatized now, but it's also based in Palmer. But that's also a source of farming revenue now if somebody is looking for a place to do that. But for us, one we knew about was the state of Alaska's ARLF, the Ag Revolving Loan Fund, and so that's who we went with, and that's what we needed to establish residency for.
And in the beginning here, you're in the barley project. You talk about selling timber. I believe early on, some people, maybe if they were the first ones in doing the auctioning, purchasing the land at auction, there may have been a restriction on selling timber. I'm not sure if there was a restriction on selling timber, but it's something. Sometimes you can't sell the resources. If we were to sell land today, you can't sell the resources until your loan's paid off, which is something that inhibits new farmers from getting into the industry. But you also had the state really, really pursuing establishing the barley market as far as an outlet for the product, and that also never really came to fruition. So you had some people that went all in on the barley, but there wasn't they kind of got the crop ahead of the market early on, and you guys were able to weather that through slow development, it sounds like, early on, or maybe it was something else, but that was a challenge through the 1980s and weather challenge as well in that early time where there were some very early snows, very early freezes shortly after the barley project really got off, and the first crop should have been hitting the market. So that was a challenge early on.
Yep. There's challenges no matter where farming occurs. Gosh, I remember in Idaho, hail was a constant threat in the summertime. Some places it's tornadoes or flooding. In Alaska, it happens in a pretty short season where you get an early snow or a late frost or something like that. And so there are challenges, and that's kind of one of the things that I think is another challenge about farming in Alaska is that most of America was settled by farmers and ranchers, and as the society grew up around those farms and ranches and towns were built and became cities and infrastructure was there, and the state governments came into being, and legislatures were formed and different programs. Everything really understood the risks associated with farming. That's what everything grew up around. But in Alaska, that didn't happen. And so I sometimes call that an ag culture. We didn't really ever develop an ag culture. And so as the barley project got going and snow happened, then people some people in government threw up their hands and said, I knew it couldn't happen. I told you can't raise that kind of stuff in Alaska. So there wasn't this understanding that, sometimes Mother Nature doesn't play fair. In America, that would have just been par for the course. Well, the next year will be different. And that's the way most farmers are. You have a bad year. I don't know how you can be a farmer and be a pessimist, but you have a bad year. You always look forward for the next year. And so you try and make those plans and you always know that next year is going to be better. But that doesn't happen unless you have an ag culture. So I think that's an important distinction for Alaska. Is we, as a state, we didn't develop that, and so the people, decision makers, if you will, that were encouraging agriculture and were supporting this in the beginning. As soon as a couple of things happened, bad weather, things like that, then they kind of threw up their hands and abandoned the idea. The only ones that stuck with it were, for the most part, were the farmers that were committed, and they knew that it would get better, and it has. So yeah, that's one of the things that you deal with Alaska. And we're pretty young. I mean, we talk about the colonists coming up here in the 30s, but gosh, this area here has only been raising grain for 35 years or so. So
yeah, it's extremely new. And you talk about the egg culture, if you will. Alaska, you were talking food security as well. If you go back to those colonist days, most of the numbers that I see is Alaska produced 80% of what it consumed here in state, and today we are in the 3 or 4% number. I mean, it's significantly dropped with the rise of population, and people moving out of the farming industry, the ranching industry. So we do not consume much of what we produce here, and so you look at some of these other places that have a lot of production. You see what happens there during a natural disaster. You have a ferry or a road cut off. Here, it's going to take a significant amount of money, time to get resources in here, and I think we only have a few days on the shelf at any given time.
Yeah, that's right. We used to, when I was growing up, if you went into the grocery store and something wasn't on the shelf, you went back and you had somebody, and they went back in the back or the warehouse back there, and they brought it back out and they filled the shelf up again. But as logistics developed and improved, they've gone to this just-in-time delivery where they order computer generated and transportation and logistics being what it is. They know that by ordering on this date, they can receive it pretty much by this date. And so these regular shipments are coming in. And when that happened, there didn't seem to be much of a need for a warehouse space in the store anymore. So what the stores did is they expanded and made more shopping area. And now if you go back in the store, all you got is generally an aisle or an alleyway there that they can receive stuff off the truck while they take it in to the shelves and restock every night. And because they're getting the truck every day or two, then there's no need to warehouse that. So the end result is that when there's a disruption in that transportation system, then there's only what's on the shelf. And I remember a number of times. It seems like this happens all the time. I remember in 1989, January of 1989, got really cold that year. And the port of Anchorage, the barge came up. 80% of our stuff probably came up on the barge. Barge come up to Anchorage and couldn't dock because the ice is in the harbor. And so it turned around, goes back, and meets the next barge. So one barge a week was coming up. It passes the next barge coming up. Well, but during that period of time, man, the store shelves were almost empty. And eventually the weather broke and the barge got in there. But for that period of time, they couldn't do that. 2012, the road washed out down at Whitehorse. So for 4 days, the trucks were stopped down there, couldn't get through. And it was amazing that the failure of those trucks to get through for those 3 or 4 days impacted the store shelves in Fairbanks. I remember seeing a newscast, Channel 13, I think it was, in Fairbanks, and so they were talking with the store manager at the store, and he said, "Yeah, we're just fronting the shelves right now," and then they do that so that people think that everything is okay. Well, you know what happens when an emergency is known about? Everybody rushes to the store and buys everything they can, and it kind of becomes a big concern. Well, by fronting the store shelves, what that means, you pull everything that's left and you kind of line it up along the front so it looks like the store shelves are full. But if you move 1 or 2 items, the store shelves are empty behind it. And you might have a whole line of something. It might not be what you want, but it looks like the shelves are full. So it kind of keeps people's concerns damped down a little bit. And you can handle that for a few days. But in reality, yeah, you get about, for some products, you got a couple, 3 days or so, and then they run out. Some other things will last longer, less in demand or something. Our goal was just to provide not an alternative so much, but another source of food, one that was closer than 1,800 miles away for those emergency situations. It was kind of interesting. For us, it was significant. For me, it was significant. It didn't amount to a hill of beans in reality, but this last year they had the earthquake down in Anchorage.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
The very day that earthquake happened, that happened in the morning, the very day that earthquake happened, we shipped out 4 pallets of food from here to Anchorage, to the stores in Anchorage. Now, granted, that 4 pallets is not even, that's not going to amount to anything. But the fact that we already had that scheduled and it went from here there to there, for me, that was a significant thing. And as we grow, one day it'll be 400 pallets that go to Anchorage. And if that happens during an emergency, if that's available during an emergency, look how much better we are off than if we didn't have that.
No,
and so that doesn't matter if it's grain products or if it's meat or vegetables or whatever. So these are things we can do, but we need to work together on it. And that working together, that involves the farmers growing it. It involves the grocery stores, because that's where people shop. People don't shop by going to the farmer and to his. The bulk of the people don't shop by going to the farmer and getting it off his farm stand or at his farm. Most of them go to the store and shop. So you got to get your local products into the store. So it takes a willingness on the part of the store the store managers to carry those local products so that they're already where they need to be when the people need them. And then just as part of commerce, you're selling this stuff just right alongside with your Wheaties and your Cheerios and everything else that's coming up from America. And then when the Cheerios and the Wheaties run out, then you still have, you're already in the store. See, you're already in that system, and it's available when people are coming in to buy their groceries. And I think that's will have an amazing effect on how well the population responds in an emergency. If they know there's going to be food, then there's going to be less concern, less stealing, less violence, less breaking in and stuff like that, because they know they can still go to the store and buy the food. And that's the biggest thing. People worry about how they're going to feed their families, and so all of a sudden there's no food there, and that's what makes people freak out.
We'll see it a little bit with the virus right now in China. I mean, certainly it's a terrible thing, but some of that is our own hype. So you can see that what can happen in a situation where you have, all right, here's a disruption in the supply chain, and then all of a sudden that turns into a panic. And if as you're saying, people understand that, look, we have a local supply chain, everything's going to be okay. Maybe it stops that panic just a little bit. But I also got to take this moment to say, eat wild salmon, buy Alaska grown if you could afford it. Those are two things that I think are extremely important because the consumer drives some of that. The consumer is an important facet of that. But agriculture in general, and now this is just talking about agriculture markets, and we'll compare here to lower 48 or to anywhere else in the world. Usually agriculture is used as an example of a perfectly competitive market. And what's meant by a perfectly competitive market is a market where you have lots of buyers and sellers. You can sell everything that you want at the market price. The products are relatively uniform, homogeneous. And I know that you have a unique barley strain, but generally barley is barley. There's differences side to side, but when they're looking at a perfectly competitive market, what they're meaning is it's something that people can buy and process in a similar way. You look at all of those things, and also low barriers to entry, blah, blah, blah. Alaska, even though agriculture needs to really operate in an environment like that, Alaska doesn't really have an outlet. So you could have, if I go to Delta Junction and I go and get a loan and start farming, and I have a good year, if I don't have my markets developed, there's not really an outlet for me to sell my product if I haven't developed my market. Now, with the Alaska Flour Company, do you purchase product from other farms, or are you just processing your own at this point?
Right now, we are only processing our own. But when we started the company, one of our goals was to create new markets. We had 3 goals when we started the company, and one of them was food security. One was to create new markets for local farmers that didn't exist at the time. And we want to do that because that spreads our risk. If we have a bad crop, we'll need other farmers' crops, And so, and if we have a windstorm on our place, maybe 10 miles down the road, that wind doesn't shatter the grain out. So it's important that we reduce that risk because it all kind of works together in a reliable food security scenario. But we're not there yet. In other words, the market that we have is not large enough yet to go to a farmer and say, we'll contract 100 acres of grain for you or from you now, and to another farmer we'll contract another 50 acres from you and stuff like. Our market's just not big enough there yet. And so what you said a little bit earlier is certainly true. In a place where you have a lot of people in the market, a lot of high population, then there's enough demand to pretty much suck up what can be generated. In Alaska, that population is small enough that percentage of people that is willing to buy Alaska grown or is dedicated to increasing our food security or that is looking for healthy food, that percentage of that population is a certain size. Let's say it's 1% or 2%. Well, if you got 700,000 people, 1 or 2% is not very many people. And so it's difficult to get enough people, enough of a market grown that you can expand your production capacity, manufacturing capacity. And so in order to accomplish that, what we have done is we've looking at other markets to grow capacity so for example, Canada. We're selling in Canada now. Toronto has, 2 or 3 million people in it. Montreal has probably about that much to it. I don't know what those numbers are. But, we're in one city there, we're talking about 3 times the size of the population of Alaska. So we're selling in Montreal and Toronto, Vancouver. Those 3 cities alone expose that this large population. You peel out the 1 or 2% that is willing to look for, healthy food, something unique from Alaska, stuff like that. You that percentage still is small, but now you've got a large enough population that percentage equals a lot of people, and then that's what we use to grow our manufacturing capacity, our milling capacity, and our network. And then, so what happens if you have next year or next month or whatever, you have an emergency, and it doesn't even have to happen here. You mentioned the coronavirus. That's nothing to do with Alaska. It's not even anything to do with America. It happens somewhere else. But many of the things that will impact our food security don't happen here. It's not because it got freezing cold in Alaska. It's because the dock workers went on strike in California, or there was a road washout in Yukon, or maybe an earthquake off the coast of Washington that impacts. So it doesn't even have to happen here. It happened. 9/11 happened, and for 3 days they grounded the flights everywhere and everything until they figured out what had happened and how widespread that disaster was. We don't have to have it happen here for it to impact our ability to access food. And so that's what we want to do, is be able to sidestep those issues. Now, in the case of coronavirus or bird flu or something like that, if that ever really developed into a true pandemic, CDC says you expect about 3 months, 90 days, for a pandemic to run its course. Well, so based on that, my goal is that Alaska gets to the point where we have about 3 months supply of food in the state. So that might be grain in grain bins, or animals in the feedlot, or in the pasture, or fish that is being able to be caught, during that period of time. Whatever, it doesn't have to be processed on the shelf. It just has to be available to be processed. But we got to get to the point where we have that kind of capacity and that kind of reserves, crops growing in the field, so that it is available whenever that pandemic happens, or whenever that disaster happens, whether it's 3 days or whether it's 3 weeks or whether it's 3 months. We just need to be moving toward improving that ability to feed ourselves.
That's what we're really missing up here in the agricultural world, though, are the co-ops and the feedlots, etc., where somebody can have an outlet for their product that isn't going directly to a store or to an individual. Does Delta still have any other? Has Delta gotten rid of all of the co-ops that they have in Delta, or are there still some other
No,
co-ops
still,
up there?
so there still is a co-op here. They primarily provide grain drying and fertilizer blending, grain storage, things like that. Um, they're a very important part of the agricultural area. But there are other groups of people that are cooperative, working together. Maybe it's not a formal co-op, maybe it's an LLC. For example, the state of Alaska probably slaughters 2,500 head of cows a year, 2,500 beef a year. But we want to get to 25,000 animals a year. We'll start there. So that's the first goal, if you will. Let's grow that to 25,000. So there's a group of farmers here in Delta that have gone together and purchased a slaughter facility in North Pole, and with the idea that now we have a place that we can start slaughtering more animals, and so then that's going to translate to that creates a place for animals that are raised in your backyard or in a feedlot to go. And so it has to start somewhere, chicken or the egg thing. You're not going to raise animals and invest in a bunch of animals and cost that way unless you know that you can go get them slaughtered and move them through the market. And so you have to pick a point where you start doing that. And so now we have the slaughter facility, and now we're actively trying to encourage people to start raising animals. And we often talk about feedlots, and feedlots are great. They're more efficient to do animals in a feedlot. But let's suppose you have a feedlot that has 5,000, that finishes 5,000 animals a year. Well, what if you have 2,500 families that each finish 2 animals a year? That's still 5,000 animals. Still 5,000 animals that get into the food chain. It just didn't happen at one place. It happened under 2,500 different families. And so if we look at it that way, it's really not that hard to get where we want to be if we just have more people doing it. One guy doesn't have to do that. Now we got a whole bunch of people doing it, but we're still accomplishing the goal of getting more and more animals into the food stream.
And if I remember, I'm certain that I read it when the state-run slaughterhouse shifted into private hands. They were talking about the number of animals that they were processing in a given year, and if the animals were available, they could increase their throughput today, 6 or 7 or 8 times. There's just not that many animals available here in the state. So there's a lot of, we do have some of that capacity, but we've got to figure out a way. So now look at going forward, you have your operation going, you have value added developed. Now let's talk about somebody that's looking at getting into agriculture, and you're getting into agriculture in Alaska. Do you kind of need to have some form of revenue or some form of loaning capacity, maybe from the state probably available? But how is somebody going to go about growing into that industry? If you were looking at somebody that says, this is something that I want to do I go out and pick up a 4,000 acre piece of land if I can find one in Delta and just start planting away, or where would you give your advice on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of a cautious guy, and I've seen a lot of people over the years come up here with great plans and a little bit of money and go out of business. Bought too much, didn't do the homework, didn't develop a market, had too much risk to learn lessons on, and they're here for a very few years, and then they're gone. And unfortunately, that's what happens. So I'm always more of a kind of a careful guy. So one of the things, if I was a young guy coming in right now, I would come here and I would do something similar to what we did when we first got here. Find a farmer who's got some ground that he's not using, and most farmers have a little bit of ground that they're not using, a few acres that's not being farmed, and say, can I use this, and I'll trade you part of my crop, or I'll trade you labor, for the use of this and some equipment, and just try it out. Get your feet under you. Kind of learn those lessons on a small scale, so that when you start scaling up, you've already learned those lessons. You know what you're in for. You know how to deal with the winter time. You know what to do to bring your yield or your crop in, and so you can do that. And I think a lot of farmers are willing to do that. Gosh, we're not getting any younger, and so that somebody else has got to do that. One of the advantages, I know some people would argue with me, that the farms here in Delta in the barley project are not fee simple titles. They're ag covenants. And there's been a lot of discussion about, well, we should convert them to fee simple. But I like the idea of ag covenants, because the ag covenants protect that from development. If all this went to fee simple, then that kind of shoots a hole in our whole argument for food security, because it's much more, you make a lot more money off development rights than you would raising anything. So by keeping the ground in ag covenants, then the only thing you can really do with it is just plant crops and pasture livestock and do those ag related things. So I think it's important to keep that.
So if
and so because of that, a farmer like myself, I get older, I said, man, I want to sell my farm, but I don't have anybody in my family. And some young guy's looking around for a place to light and try it out. I'll say, yeah, I've got 200 acres down here, and I've got some equipment that I'm not using now. So, yeah, you come and help me with my planting and harvesting. We'll just take the equipment down there. We'll plant your crops and harvest them. Or maybe I've got some ground and he wants to raise beef or something. I said, man, I'll fence this off and let you raise beef there, and then we'll rotate this ground, and I'll put crops in where you had your beef next year, and you move your beef over here, and you fertilize this part now, and we'll go back and forth like that. And there's a lot of ways to kind of help make that happen
without the large money up front. And when somebody's listening, yep, they may not have all of the land terminology straightened out. When you're talking ag covenants, most of the ag covenants don't allow you to divide your land into home sites or into commercial development. Sometimes you can subdivide once down to like 40-acre plots, something like that, but you can't do it over and over again. If it were fee simple, some people are going to argue that in a year or 2 years of tough economic times or bad crops, you could take 40 acres, develop 40 home sites, make money off of that, and then and then that would keep the farm afloat. I think if you go down and you look in the lower 48, I don't think that dreamy ideal is exactly what would happen. Generally, there are developers that are able to come in, purchase the entire thing because there's money to be made, and it's very hard for somebody if you're sitting on a large piece of property and it doesn't look like it's going to stay in the family, it's very difficult to keep that thing, to say, no, I don't want to have this go over to development. And so I think your argument's pretty spot on with what would actually happen. But I do see the logic in how fee simple could help some farmers, ranchers stay in business in tough years. So I see both sides on that one.
Yeah. Well, and I can too. But you don't have to go outside to see what would happen, and you just look at the map too. So, that farm ground there that was so productive, most of that's under houses now. And once that's gone, you don't get it back. And so, if Alaska has a finite number of acres that are in a suitable climate, suitable soil type for growing crops, for doing agriculture, then we kind of have to protect that, because every 40 acres that gets subdivided is 40 acres less the more that we pull out of the pool. There's less available to grow crops, and so that's kind of where I look at it. I recognize I've had farmers say, "Well, I figure that selling this off to home sites, this is my retirement." But that doesn't really work, because the ag rights ground is purchased for lesser amount than fee simple ground to begin with. And so if you're going to be converting that to fee simple, then you're going to have to buy up those development rights somehow. And yeah, maybe you can see that as your retirement, but I think that that's a short-sighted way of looking at the big picture, which is how do we help make Alaska more self-sustaining?
Well, there's the Dunleavy administration right now seems to be very interested in moving land into private ownership. I think some of that is going to where I think that they're headed is to having another type of Delta project. So you have the bridge over in Nenana that's going to be built.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a significant number of people that look at the Delta project as something that was generally a failure, but there was a really neat article. I'll link to this article on my website. It said don't tell the Delta farmers that the barley project didn't work, or however it is. It's an easy thing to pick out and say,
yeah.
oh, this is what didn't work. But you know that the operations in Delta, there's still a lot of them in operation. So what
yep.
would if we go over and we start doing this over in Nenana, the thing that I was speaking about earlier is a lot of times competition is something that we're a little bit scared of, or you can look at it as somebody eating into your market value. However, for agriculture in this state, the more people that participate, it should drive up some of the demand and some of the outlets and allow more people to get into the industry. It would actually benefit farmers at some stage, some level of growth. Maybe we get 10 or 20% more farmers, and therefore the market's more well developed, something like that. Is that accurate? Or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. So you probably wouldn't want to do the Nenana development exactly the same as the Delta development. And the reason is because there are a different set of resources there. You got a longer season than Delta does, and you're closer to a market, a large market, Fairbanks, 50 miles away as opposed to 100 miles away. You got access to a railroad, which Delta doesn't have, and you have access to to navigable rivers, which can get you down into some of the villages and stuff too. So there are a different set of resources that you can tap into. So I would suggest that we don't just duplicate Delta, that we learn from what worked in Delta and what didn't work in Delta, and then make some modifications. I personally think that a good mix of different size farms in Nenana would be a positive way to go, so that there were some larger farms for people who are looking to raise crops like grain and canola and wheat. Wheat is actually a crop that might raise all right in Nenana, being slightly longer growing season. But at the same time, you can have some smaller acreages for raising animals or vegetables, things like that. I talked to a store owner down in Anchorage, and he said he would buy every organic carrot that could be raised, and that would take about for to meet his. This is one store. I think it was going to take about 40 acres, but he wanted it organic. Well, if you can raise it organic, then fine. There's a lot of misconceptions about organic, how easy it is or how hard it is, and people that don't know that shouldn't be talking about it. But if it's possible to do it, then there's an opportunity for a market right there.
Well, let me touch on organic real quick. One of the things that gets me with organic is that as the demand for organic grows, the one thing that we just have to realize is that organic in the very beginning was a neat concept, and I'm not opposed to organic at all, and sometimes I purchase organic, sometimes I don't. But in the very beginning,
mm-hmm.
it was a new market, it was for a specific customer, but as customers started buying more and more, you had the truly dedicated organic farmers, let's say, as more supply came onto the market, they weren't able to stay afloat necessarily. This is just the logic of it. And so what you develop is the operations that are just barely scraping by as organic, that's what the market is. So it actually, the growth of organic has actually hurt what was the original ideal of organic in some ways. That just kind of has to be the way that that's played out. I can't tell you that I've looked at a study that shows that, but that's just the way that I see that had to have played out.
I think that for us up here, there's a couple of things. Again, we talked about what resources do we have. One of the resources we have up here is that our agriculture is the areas where agriculture is grown are widely separated, and so our soils are relatively new. They're clean, free of disease. We don't have the weed pressures they have in America. We don't have the insect pressures they have in America. And so those are some strengths that we can build on. And I would argue that in many ways, non-organic grown food up here is probably healthier than organic grown food in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the problem is that we start competing for, the food growers start competing for market. And so in order to do that, it's kind of like a political thing where you start bashing the other guys. And organic has been bashing conventionally grown for a long time with some claims that are not substantiated in fact. And I'm of the opinion that we need all of that food. So when we talk about feeding 11 billion people by 2050, it's going to take everything we can produce, regardless of whether it's grown organically or not organically. And so I'm like you. Sometimes I buy stuff that's organic, but I don't go out of my way looking for it. But if I see it there and that's what it is, I don't mind buying organic. But I'm not afraid to buy non-organic either. I think that to make the judgment that if you don't support organic, then you're somehow less than human is a huge failing on the part of people. That's like saying if you're not a Republican or not a Democrat, you're less than human. You're deplorable or whatever, you know.
Right, absolutely.
You kind of need to allow people to eat what they want to eat and what they can afford to eat, and don't bash them for what their choices are. Nobody's trying to make you do anything. Buy what you want and let everybody else buy what they want. So that's kind of my philosophy on that.
So you've been at this for 40 years now. Do you think, and I mean you've alluded to this already, but do you think that there's a future for the new generation, or so when you came into it, you came from a family that was absolutely full of rich agriculture history. Are we going to be able to grow farmers here in this state? I know that there are some operations like the Alaska Flour Company that has generations, and maybe at some point you're going to have 3 or 4 generations on the same operation, and it's probably a dream come true. But are we going to be able to grow farmers, ranchers internally? Are we going to have to ship them in? And is there a future in it for somebody that's looking at getting into it?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of opportunity. When we came up here, one of the things I noticed right away, and again, this is a lot of years ago, no matter if you want to do something in Idaho, no matter what you wanted to do, you look around, there's 10 people doing it already. You come up here and you look around and there's nobody doing it. I mean, there's so many opportunities. When you talk about 5% or less of our products that we eat being grown here, people say, "Dang, that's not very much." And I look at it and say, "Wow, what a market!"
Yeah, what an opportunity.
And again, back to this optimism thing. You can see opportunities there because there's so little done, and so I think that there's huge opportunities for people who want to do that. But it's not going to be easy. That's a question that I have sometimes in my own mind is do we have a generation of kids that are willing to work hard enough to be farmers? With the societal changes that have happened over the last 10 years or so, with the Internet of Things and stuff like that, it seems like a lot of people are looking for a job in Silicon Valley where they can make a lot of money and wear blue jeans to work and tennis shoes or whatever, flip-flops, and just live their life, kind of like back in the 60s when they had the hippie generation. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just love everybody and everything will be good. But somebody's got to be out there when it's 40 or 50 below feeding cows. But somebody's got to be out there working 18 hours a day to put a crop in or to bring a crop out. And so the question I have sometimes is do we have a generation coming up, some of whom are willing to work like that? It's a very rewarding career to be able to work with your kids and work with your grandkids and just be on a farm. I mean, we go out here in the summertime, we walk down the road, the field road here, and it's just quiet, just quiet. I go out into the cover crop field, and I just hear this constant deep buzz. That whole field is buzzing with bees and flies and things like that, pollinating these flowers and stuff. And I just love that. I just can't imagine being someplace where that is not evident. And so there are trade-offs. Maybe you won't make as much as you do down Silicon Valley, but wow, what a lifestyle! So, do we have people coming up who aspire to that kind of lifestyle? Want to raise their kids in a place that's healthy, that's quiet, that's friendly, that's where you work with your hands. You get up in the morning, you go to bed tired, but you can't wait to get up again in the morning. Well, there's a few people that are like that.
And there's a piece of it that a lot of people don't give this the credit for. Once you get in, if you're doing an operation on 10 acres or 40 acres, you're really committed to what you're going to grow in many ways. If you're starting to get into a larger operation, or when you're beginning, it's a constant battle of trial and error. You talked about going through how many different, finding your market took you 20 years of development before you really had, this is exactly what we're doing. And then another, 6, 7, 8 years of dreaming up the Alaska Flower Company. And it's this long process. A lot of times we don't have the ability to look and work for what we're going to be handing down, etc. And that's something that agriculture gives an opportunity for families to develop that. We have these other opportunities in the state, and the more people that get involved in it, the more the market develops, the more that all of these operations help. And another thing that's benefiting is there isn't a lot of large operators, as far as I can tell. Maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, but there isn't a lot of large operators that are coming in and snatching up acreage in Alaska and putting it into mass production, which you see down in the lower 48 more frequently. Up here, that's another competition you don't necessarily have.
Well, there's a size that fits everybody. Some, depending on what your crop is, your resources, how much money you got, how much land you have or can afford. There's no reason that somebody can't do something intensive and still make a living. When we first moved up here, there was a lady in town here, and she had, I think, about 3/4 of an acre of garden. She made more money on that 3/4 of an acre of garden selling it at the farmer's market than we made on our farm. So those kind of things can be done. So if you don't have, maybe you're one guy, maybe you even have to work a job, but you got your Saturdays off and you want to do a farmer's market, plant a half an acre of vegetables and harvest them and take them in there and sell them on the Saturdays and get started doing that. If you don't have a lot of pasture ground for animals, but you want to get into something like that, get a hog and farrow her and raise babies and sell them as wiener pigs to somebody else who's going to fatten them and put them on the plate. Same with cattle. You don't have to have a feedlot to still be involved, and you get started in that, then a lot of times growth will kind of occur naturally. You figure things out. Maybe now you've got a heifer that gets born and she's looking like she'd be a good cow. So you save her instead of sell her, and you breed her. Now you got 2 cows. So growth a lot of times can happen naturally, and we don't have to make that happen. It's like you watch a sitcom and all the problems get solved in half an hour. Well, that doesn't happen with agriculture. Like what you said, you have to kind of take the long look at things. But communities that have agricultural bases are more stable than communities that are not. And the reason is because it's not as easy to just pick up and go get another job and leave everything, because you're tied to the land. And so you work harder, you develop that community, you get on the school board, you send your kids to school, you get involved in church, you do those things that make a community.
That's a great
because
point.
you're there for the long haul.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a great point. I'm living, operating in Bristol Bay. There's extremely high turnover. It's hard for somebody to set down roots in Dillingham. There's a population of people that have been born and raised in Dillingham, but people just flow in and out. And you face a little bit of that with Delta because you've got the military base and stuff. But as far as the agriculture base, that is really an anchor and probably the heart of the community. Another opportunity as we wrap it up, another thing that I see with agriculture in the state, when you have the Alaska Flower Company and you're producing something that somebody, a value added product, tourism is growing, and it won't be so long before the tourists or the consumers say, look, I want to have this product. They don't want to get onto a cruise ship in Alaska to have Bisquick. They're looking for, and this is a market for more people, opportunity. Restaurants and chefs and other people are looking for somebody to supply it, but it is going to take a lot of work for us to go and cultivate it.
Yeah, and that's something that we can help each other do. For example, we've got couscous products that pair really well with crab or salmon, and so working together, we can help each other develop those markets in the cruise ships, in the tourism industry, and then too, there's the agritourism, which is really taken off in America. And we started into that a little bit. We have several tours a year coming through on buses, and they call us up and say, we got this many buses coming up this summer. Can you do these days? And we like that opportunity to show what we're doing and build, not only build markets, because they all buy stuff and they'll order stuff when they get home, and we ship it down to America. They order it online. So we build that market there, but we're spreading the word that Alaska is open for business. These are healthy products, they're good products, and a lot of them will buy stuff for souvenirs. It's not something you're going to set up on the shelf and let it collect dust and then until it falls off and breaks or something. It's something you're going to go home and you're going to eat. And every time you eat that, you're going to think, dang, that was a fun trip.
Well, I can tell you right now, for Christmas or for any of these other things, I'm going to add some of your products to send down, because I love to grab Alaska-grown products, to grab something like that. Of course, we do salmon. We do other items like that. Grab some of your product, put it into the basket. We always send our jams and stuff that we make, and people appreciate that during the gift time. And I think I just think it's great to be able to buy something that was grown here. I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you from Bristol Bay to Delta Junction. We're in the state, and there's a special thing about the state of Alaska, some of the community that we have developed. So people should go out and make sure that they're supporting these industries so we can grow it and increase our food security. Bryce, I really appreciate talking to you. I enjoy everything that you are doing. Hopefully after the harvest, maybe this fall, I'll talk to you again, maybe sooner, and just check in frequently with the Alaska Flower Company, see how you're developing. And I know that there's a giant interest in people that want to talk to somebody or at least listen to somebody who's been successful in the industry, because there's a lot of people that have the dream of doing what you do. They may not, as I like to say, they may want to do what you do, but they may not want to have to do what you did to do what you do. So there's those two things that go hand in hand. But a lot of people are interested in agriculture, particularly in Alaska, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's one thing I wanted to just touch base on. We talked briefly about, and that was the organic stuff. I wanted to kind of just clarify. I'm not opposed to people raising organic stuff. One of the challenges with organic up here is it has to be certified in order to be truly organic, and there is not an organic certifier up here. And so what people do, if they're interested in organic, somebody wants to raise organic vegetables or organic grain or whatever, what they do is they will raise them as close to using organic practices as they can. If the soil it doesn't have enough nutrients, right nutrients, and there's no other way to do that, maybe they will put some fertilizer on it. Nitrogen is nitrogen, whether it's in the air or whether it's in urea. Nitrogen is still nitrogen. This is an element, Same with phosphorus and same with potash. These are all sulfur. These are all just elements, whether you get them out of a crop or whether you get them out of a animal manure or whether you pull it out of the air. The important thing is that if you're into organic and you want to try and raise organic because you believe that it's healthier, then just raise it as close to organic growing principles as you can, and then just let people know. Don't try and pawn it off as organic. Just let them know this was raised as close to organic as we can do it.
I'm gonna hurt somebody's.
What I was trying to point out when I said that, if it's raised in Alaska, it's coming out of clean soil, and a clean place is probably healthier than organic raised in America.
Well, the soils are fundamentally different up here because they haven't been tilled and processed for 100 and 150 years, etc.
Yeah.
That's what I believe to be true. That's what you're saying here. There's no reason for me to doubt that. When you talk about the organic, I may bother some of the beekeepers in the state. I did spend a lot of time, 10 years beekeeping. There are a lot of people that put organic on their honey, and there's no way to certify where your honey. So if you're buying organic honey, just to let you know, it's not certified organic. Bees are going to go from the hive 2 miles.
If it's not coming up through the store, it's not coming up through the store. It's not certified organic.
Right, and it's nearly impossible to know where your bees may have gone and gotten into something over here or there, but that's just one of the examples about the organic industry. Somebody may be able to put a label on there in a very rare case, but it doesn't make the product, especially in honey, that's what I know of, it doesn't make the product any different, or certified organic or not.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, again, I hope that you'll come back and do this more frequently so that we can check in a lot, because I have such an interest in the agriculture, and I'm excited to see, because I just got this gut feeling that we're on the verge of maybe moving towards trying to entice more people into agriculture. The state's going to have to make an investment in the right support for those people, but it's going to be people like you that are going to have to lead some of that stuff as far as setting the example, and sharing your knowledge. So I'm glad that you took the time to talk with me today on that.
Yeah, that's all of us got to do that. I can't imagine anybody wanting to see somebody fail at agriculture. And how narrow-minded would your life be if that's what you wanted? So in order to make that happen, you got to kind of share some lessons. They still make decisions. You can't help that. But if they're just looking for knowledge and are willing to listen, and I think most farmers are willing to help them figure that out and share what they've learned. And I appreciate the people who have shown me and taught me, and I take every opportunity I can to share my knowledge with somebody else. I just think that's kind of what we owe each other.
Well, thanks a bunch, Bryce. I'll talk to you soon. And once again, Alaska Flower Company, buy their product if you see it, or go and ask for it. Go to the website. You can get it at most of the stores that we have here. And I'll talk to you soon, Bryce.
Thanks, Casey. You have a great night.